Hello again. We are back continuing our study on Joseph out of the Old Testament. And we left Joseph last time where he had finally encountered his brothers after 24 years um, in Egypt. If you recall, Joseph was the second most powerful man in Egypt at the time. He had managed to engineer saving Egypt from starvation by his plan, and he had put it in place. And now people from all over the regions were coming to buy grain, and they had to go through Joseph. And lo and behold, his brothers show up to buy grain. Joseph recognizes them, as you recall. They don't recognize him, and he decides, I think wisely, to want to find out quite a few answers, really, from his brothers. But I think he wanted it without any spin and for sure without any white lies. So he starts to talk to them and charges them as being spies. This gets them really upset, and they just open up and start blabbing the entire family history, and Joseph just walks through the door, okay? And he decides to make a plan to where he has one of the brothers arrested, quote unquote, and tells them that they have got to go back and bring back that young brother so they can prove to him that they aren't spies. So that's where we're at. And also Joseph gives them grain, and he also secretly has all the money that they had brought to pay for the grain put back in their sacks. And on the way home, they find that money as well. So it must have been a long, long trip home, because they are going to have to tell their dad, we got grain, but we are in big trouble in Egypt. Okay? So that's kind of where we're at. We'll begin that right there. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, I just thank you again for the opportunity of being here to study your word. Father, it's always a privilege. And Father, I just come praying for those listening in who have issues. You know what they are. Father, I just pray that you would bring them comfort, peace, if it's your will, healing. Help us to take the lessons we can learn from this remarkable man from many, many years ago that we can apply it even to today in our lives. And it's in your Son's name I pray. Amen. Well, to this point, Joseph's encounter with his brothers had been to try to answer several questions. Well, he knew his dad was still alive, and he knew his brother was living at home. And the brothers, had at least sold him into slavery or tried to kill him like they had him. Joseph also, I think, from what we saw last week, kind of knew where their brothers' hearts were, that they were admitting that they had sinned against God for the way that they treated Joseph. But there were still some unanswered questions in Joseph's mind, and he wanted those questions answered. And they involved attitudes towards Benjamin and their father. But most importantly, it was Joseph trying to find out where these guys' relationship was with God. And quite frankly, sadly, I think at this point, they were not very close, just as their father was not as well. So he had to know these things before he revealed his true identity. And he sends them off to go get young Benjamin and bring him back home. So that's where we pick up the story this morning. The guys were returning back home to see the old man. So let's go to Genesis 42. We'll start it up in verses 29 through 35. So when they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, and they said, the man who's Lord over the land spoke harshly to us, treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, son of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. Well, they just spilled their guts to this guy. He wasn't even asking for the information. And Joseph just walked in, okay, and took this and opened the door up. I think it's pretty interesting. And then the man who is Lord over the land said, this is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so I will know that you are not spies but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land. Interesting business. Verse 35, and as they were emptying their sacks, which was probably along the way, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened, and I don't blame them. I would be too, okay? Very interesting. So the bad news was, for old Jacob, you got to send Benjamin back to Egypt. And what made things even worse was silver was back in the bags. They had to think, that not only is this guy going to think we're spies, but he also is going to think we're also a bunch of thieves. It was a rough time in Canaan for these guys. Look at verse 36. And their father said to them, this is Jacob, their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Listen to these words, folks. You have deprived me of both of my sons, and to death if you... Hold on, back up. He says, Father says, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon, that's the one who's in jail, is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. Are you getting the drift on this? I, me, you people have deprived me of my children. Everybody's against me. Okay? That was Jacob's attitude with his sons. Really, truly the groanings of a sad dad. And folks, if he had really been in tune with God, Jacob, this would have been a time for him to get down on his knees, do some praying, asking God for wisdom and guidance, and showing him what we should do to get out of the situation, but trusting him to guide him. We don't see that one time in this verse. It's always about him. I. So because life often doesn't work right, and by that being interpreted, it doesn't work out our way, okay, we, according to Chuck Swindoll in his book on David, we have a natural tendency to do three things rather automatically whenever change comes into our lives or we have some serious challenge, either good or bad. And the first one is, he says, that we tend, when these things come up, to respond negatively rather than positively. Whenever these challenges come into our lives or changes, our first reaction is we don't like it, or no, I don't want to do that. It's a natural tendency to not trust that stuff. And then secondly, he says that we tend to view problems horizontally rather than vertically. Now, what I mean by that, or what he means, is that when a challenge comes into our life or a problem or change, we tend to look at it from the point of, automatically saying, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? What's the best way out of this for me? What should I do? That's horizontally. We don't put God into the picture at all. We go off and try to fix the problem. And then when we paint ourselves in a corner after things go south, then that's when we start yelling to God. And that's the vertical side. The problem is we tend to do that later instead of sooner. The third one is that we tend to resist, especially what is new, if it seems too good to be true. Now, I know in our culture we're pretty cynical these days, and we probably have good right to be careful about any opportunity or something that comes into our lives that does maybe sound too good to be true. But we need to still be open-minded to opportunities that come into our lives and embrace them. And regrettably, folks, these three tendencies, as we get older, tend to intensify. And rather than getting better, we kind of get brittle. And I got to tell you, my daughters and my wife can tell you I'm one of these guys that doesn't like change, all right? That's for sure. Never have. They could probably give you my schedule every day, tell you exactly what I'm going to do, and I've always done it that way, okay? And it's the same way with computers. I hate them. And when they first came on board with Excels and all that stuff with Microsoft, I really fought it. And I was in a situation where I had young people who were either working for me or with me. They did all that, and I never learned it very well. And I look back now on that, and I should have taken that opportunity and done a little better with it. So we do have a tendency to do that. Jacob really showed these tendencies when these guys show up back from Egypt, okay? Now, at this point, Reuben, who was the oldest son, wastes no time when they get to see Jacob to give him Joseph's message about what's going on. And he attempted to convince Jacob to allow Benjamin to come back with them to Egypt. And really, he had quite a startling offer. Look at verse 37. What does it say there? Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back to you." Now, those are pretty strong words, folks. As bad as Jacob may have been, there's no doubt he would have not had his grandkids killed over this. But you can kind of see the frustration that Reuben felt at that time. It really shows, I think, the extent to which he had felt untrusted by his father for all these years. And we know all about that. It's little doubt that because Reuben was the oldest son, Jacob had made him responsible for the death of Joseph. And I would think that Jacob probably reminded Reuben many, many times, if not overtly, covertly, about what probably he would consider his responsibility in Joseph's death. And then there also was the issue about years before Reuben having an affair with one of Jacob's concubines. Jacob never forgave him for that, even to his dying day. So this kind of lack of trust really must have really weighed heavily on Reuben, really most of his life. But it probably felt unfair to him to one degree, because if you remember, it was Reuben who tried to rescue Joseph when they were out there in the desert and take him back to his dad. You go back to chapter 37 real quick. We'll take a look at that real fast to kind of see what the scene looked like. Says this. So they were out there, and says, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. In other words, they were going to kill him. That was the plan. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him in this cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So Reuben's plan, I'm sure, was throw this kid in the ditch, in the pit, and we can do something else later. Well, I think for whatever reason, Reuben disappears for maybe a number of days. Okay, and then the Midianites come in. Obviously, Joseph's taken out of the well and sold, and he shows up, and it's in verse 30. And so he went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Boy, he knew he was in serious trouble with his dad, because it had been his plan not to let those boys kill him, okay? But his lips had to be sealed all these years because he was now part of the deception, and he couldn't say anything without revealing, exposing his brothers for what had happened. Bad situation. Let's look at verse 38. This is interesting. Listen to these words again. This is Jacob. Verse 38, "My son will not go down there with you." So what's Jacob's first response to this? No. Okay? He said, let's see, where are we? Yeah. "My son will not go down with you. His brother is dead. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left." Now if you were the other brothers, listening to your dad say that to you guys, you would think, well, wait a minute, aren't we your sons too? And look at the way he's talking to them. "If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. I, me, you. You guys are the problem, and this is what's going to happen." So the answer is no, okay, at least initially. So that's kind of where we are. It's amazing, though, that it's as if the other sons don't even exist with him. It's like they're hired hands. It's just all about Joseph and Benjamin, okay? he doesn't even call them your brothers when he's talking to these other sons. And it sure looks pretty much like Jacob was still having issues with favoritism, even at this point in time. Well, from this point on in the story, Reuben becomes just one of the brothers, okay? And his name doesn't really appear specifically until a lot later when his dad is on his final days. And even then, he reminds Reuben of what he did and that he's lost his position of honor in the family because of that. You know, folks, it's a pathetic reminder that in a lot of situations, we can make mistakes that in some respects, take us beyond the point of no return from having reconciliation. And it happens especially in family situations. And I would warn you to try to protect those family situations at all costs. Don't let them get that bad to where you can't come back. Remember, God said, we heard about that last week, it's not only healing the heart that He wants reconciliation. He wants relationships to be healed, if at all possible. Okay? Well, so now it's about, probably we aren't sure, but it maybe has been a month since those boys came back, told the old man, this is the problem and this is the mess we're in. A month goes by. It just seems like nobody says anything about anything to anybody, okay? So we're getting ready to look at the debate. And this starts in chapter 43. Now, I got to tell you, I love this little scene here. I wish I'd been a fly on a wall when this conversation was going on. Folks, this was, to me, was not some congenial family conversation. This was a knockdown, drag out, name calling, blaming, finger pointing, and if there were any loose pots and pans, they went too, okay? This must have been a Donnybrook for these guys. But let's get started. Look at verses 1 through 2. Now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, this is this killer. Their father says to them, go back and buy a little more food. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we just tell you we got a big problem down there? It's just like the old man I hope it's gone away. Crazy business. But now we got a new spokesman, and it's Judah that pops up. And I got to tell you, I don't have a leg to stand on biblically, but I'd like to think that I have a lot of respect for Judah, because I'd like to think that he's one of those people that listens more and talks less, okay? And I think he was probably one of those guys that when he did speak, it was always the truth and it was wise words, okay? We got to remember that it was from the line of Judah that our Messiah comes from, okay? Interesting. But look what Judah says, verses 3 through 5. But Judah said to him, his dad, the man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. What's he intimating there? He's telling them, if you don't come back with that boy, you aren't going to see me again. And guess what? You're probably not going to see Simeon. And for sure you ain't going to get any food. Okay? So he goes on in verse 4. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. Verse 5. But, old man, if you will not send him, we will not go, because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Pretty stern. Boys are saying, if he doesn't go with us, we're not going, okay? He tells him he'll be personally responsible for him. Look at verses 6 through 10. Israel asked, this is fun. This is Jacob. Israel asked, why did you bring this trouble on me? Here we go again. By telling the man you had another brother. I can just see him say, you dummies, why did you even talk about the rest of us, okay? Now, it's a fair question. I mean, it really is, all right? But I just love it, okay? And here, well, they replied, verse 7, well, the man questioned us as closely as about ourselves and our family. Well, he sure did, because he walked right in when you opened the door up, okay? That's what he did. Is your father still living? He asked us. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. I love this. How were we to know he would say, bring your brother down here? It's almost like this telling the old man, what do you think we are, mind readers or something? I just bet it was just getting crazy, okay? Look at verse 8. And then Judah said to Israel, his father, you send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. They were starving to death. They had to do something. I myself will guarantee his safety, and you can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life, which I think basically Judah was telling the old man, if I don't come back with that kid, take me out of the will. Okay? That's what I think. Verse 10. As it is, this is great. This is Judah. This is why I like the guy. A great verse here. He says, as it is, old man, he goes on to tell him, if we had not delayed, which means you, okay, we could have gone and returned twice. Just kind of put it out there and told him this is how it is, buddy. I'm sure Dad loved that. So Judah holds himself responsible, and reluctantly, I'm sure the old man consents, as we all know. He has no choice because, they were starving. So he instructs their brothers to pack gifts. And I want to tell you, there were nothing but bribes for this guy. And it was pitiful because Joseph could care less about the bribes, okay? And then he also tells them to pack up the silver and put twice amount back in the sack, and let's go down there and see if we can get this guy calmed down. So he gives in, but he responds with all kinds of uncertainty, okay? What did he do? Well, first of all, he denied it. He said no, and then he delayed it, okay? And then then there was blame. And now finally he's back to bribery. And, he was pretty good at bribery, if you remember. Bribed his brother, and he conned his uncle Laban out of cows. The guy was pretty good at this business. But he was reverting back to his old ways. And he thought, well, maybe we can bribe the minister down there too, which was, really kind of ludicrous considering the wealth that probably Joseph had. So, deeply distressed, Jacob sends them packing on their pitiful little donkeys, okay? Verses 11 through 14. Then their father Israel said to them, well, if it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. Yeah, sure. A little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the amount of silver with you, for you must return the silver that was put in your sack in the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, and go back to the man at once. Now listen to this. After all this horizontal business, what does Jacob finally say in verse 14? And may God Almighty, okay, have mercy on you before the man, so that he will let your brother and Benjamin come back with you. And here we go again. And as for me, if I am bereaved, boy, I'm just bereaved. So there you go. He's relented, but he's also finally, at least timidly, gone vertical, asking, hoping that God will be merciful on the thing. Jacob still refused to see God's hand in this stuff, folks. Don't get me wrong. But only in verse 14 do we see any kind of vertical move for him looking to God for guidance. Well, so we're back returning to Egypt, and the brothers are en route with the little brother, and their mission is 4 parts, really, to show good faith to Joseph, that they showed back up, to prove they weren't spies because they had Benjamin with them, and to get Simeon bailed out of the slammer, which he really wasn't in jail. He spent that whole time in Joseph's house. I'm convinced of that. And to get more food, and I guarantee you, get that food and get out of Dodge as fast as possible, all right? And they were bringing double the money back. Look at verses 15 through 18. So the men took the gifts, double the amount of silver, and Benjamin also, and they hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon. The man did as Joseph told them and took the men to Joseph's house. Now the men, that's the brothers, were frightened when they were taken to the house. They thought, we were brought here because of the silver and that was put back into our sacks the first time, he wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. What a pitiful thing to think that Joseph would really want their donkeys. It's just, just amazing. But they were shook up from what was going on. This was not what they were expecting, okay? But it's really interesting. These guys, I'm sure, on this trip down to Egypt had this big rehearsal about what they were going to say about everything, all right? And now they were so desperate they would talk to anybody who would listen to them, okay? Well, look at verses 19 through 22. They finally start with the servant and just give them a whole life story. It's really interesting. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. "Oh, please, sir," they said, "we came down here the first time to buy food. But at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found our silver, the exact weight in the mouth of the sack." They're just giving this poor servant this whole line of, "Please, it's a great excuse. Help us, if you can." It's just really. Verse 22, "We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. Oh, we don't know who put the silver in our sacks." But this is so cool, okay? The way this guy answers this. This is the servant. He lets him go on and give this long dissertation, and then he says, "It's all right." Okay, he said, "Don't be afraid." And now what does he say? "Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks." You know what, folks? That's really grace. We're going to find out was in those sacks, all right? And that's a fact. "I received your silver," this guy said. So he's got the silver. And then he brought Simeon out to them. I wonder about Simeon being there maybe for that long a period of time if Joseph ever came down and talked to him. We don't have any clue what that happened. Or maybe did he not even see him or say anything to him for almost that whole time? Makes you wonder. Interesting thing. But anyway, Simeon's reunited with him. All right. It's just a thought. But here we have this polytheistic Egyptian talking about their God that they were supposed to be following and weren't, and the God of their father. And maybe the name of the true God probably had been talked more in this Egyptian household, okay, among these people than probably had in Jacob's whole family the last 20 years. Interesting thought. So Joseph arrives, and the brothers all have their little gifts, bribes, in front of him, and he didn't care about that stuff. Look at verses 24 through 28. "The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon, and because they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, 'How is your aged father?' 'You told me about it. Is he still living?' Well, they replied, 'Your servant, our father, is still alive and well.' And they bowed low to pay him honor." So what does Joseph find out? Well, they brought the money back, and Benjamin and Dad are still alive. But the moment comes when his eyes fall upon his little brother. Look at verse 29. "As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, 'Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?' 'God be glorious to you, my son.'" That's Joseph talking to Benjamin. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. That's really quite a moment. It has to be. Benjamin was 23 years old now. Last time Joseph had seen him, he was just 1. So it had to have been quite a scene. And, even for a leader of millions of people, they sometimes have moments of emotion that can get overwhelming, okay? Let's look at verses 32 through 34. It says this. "So they served him. After washing his face, he came out and controlled himself, said, 'Serve the food.' So they served him by himself," that's Joseph, "the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for they were detestable to Egyptians." I'm not sure why that was the case. Maybe they didn't smell very good. What can I tell you? So if you see the picture, Joseph is in one table, probably at the top. His invited guests are around him, and then these guys are all at their little table, okay? Now, this is interesting, verse 33. The men had been seated before him in the order, what, folks? Of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. You know, they had, when they started to get seated, some of us all of a sudden probably started going, wait a minute, we're getting seated according to birth. What's going on with this guy? How would he know that? It had to be going across their minds. And they looked at each other in astonishment. Isn't that something? Look at verse 34. So when portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portions was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. What an occasion. Doesn't sound like it's too scary to me, huh? Interesting thing. I want to read some Swindoll in his book on Joseph real quick. He has some comments about this. Within a brief span of time, they found themselves treated kindly, sitting around a banquet table loaded with food and of all things, relaxing with the joyful presence of royalty. What relief. But better than that, what grace. Okay? What grace. They were the recipients of favor they hadn't earned and kindness they didn't deserve. And that's true, boy. And their fear was now displaced by grace. Why? One reason, Joseph. He goes on to say this, Joseph's life offers us a magnificent portrayal of the grace of God as he came to rescue, our rescue in the person of his son Jesus. So many come to him like Joseph's guilty brothers, feeling distant and fearing the worst from God, only to have him demonstrate incredible generosity and mercy, okay? And instead of being blamed, we are forgiven. Instead of feeling guilty, we are freed. And instead of experiencing punishment, which we certainly deserve, we are seated at his table and serve more than we can ever take in. For some, it's too unreal, and that's very true. So we desperately plead our case, only to have him speak kindly to us, promising us peace in our own language. We then try to fend off his anger by bargaining with him, thinking our hard work and sincere efforts will pay him back for all those evil past deeds we're guilty of. But to our astonishment, he never even considered our attempts enough to mention. We had in mind what was earning just enough to silence our guilt, but he had in mind was overwhelming us with such an abundance we'd realize we can never, ever repay. And folks, when you get a handle on what grace has done for you, that's one of the first things you suddenly realize. I can never repay the grace and mercy I've been given. Okay? He finishes it by saying, do you long for him? I've got good news. In an even greater way, greater than you can ever imagine, he longs to be gracious to you. He is offering you all the things you hunger for. The table is loaded, and he's smiling, waiting for you to sit down and enjoy the feast he prepared with you in mind. Have a seat. Grace is being served. Boy, we see that in this scene with Joseph and his brothers and what that must have meant. And the overwhelming thing, realizing that they didn't expect this and think that nor did they deserve it. Well, here's some final thoughts. You know, when changes or challenges come into our life, Swindoll says we need to be really careful not to have a negative mentality, okay? We need to try not to do that. We need to get God involved early on, asking for guidance, for wisdom, not later. We've got to start vertical. We have got to guard our relationships with our family. Reuben learned the hard way that we've all seen. And he tried, he could not right that total wrong with his father. You know, we can't predict, folks, how people will respond to our mistakes and even to our efforts at reconciliation. We don't know. Total repentance, though, and taking responsibility for our mistakes always will bring results, no matter what the mistakes are, okay? God will always honor a humble, contrite, straightforward confession. I believe that. He will always honor that. God is still sovereign in all of our affairs, folks. He's the sovereign in your life and mine. He has a plan, and it will be done, okay? It will be done. And I believe that unrepentant sin, again, will be dealt with. It's going to be dealt with sooner or later. But folks, in this life, he can take even the worst mistakes and our sins, and he can bring some kind of good out of it. He has that ability. And most importantly, it's because of the love, I think, we do not have a grasp of. We do not have the grasp of the love he has for us and what that means. He gives us pardon, okay, and grace and mercy. That pardon came, folks. Your sins were pardoned the moment you said yes to Christ. The book of sins that God had on you was thrown in the trash when you accepted him. And in its place you were given grace and mercy. And folks, you're getting that right now, every day. All right? And those grace and mercy over all those awful mistakes and sins that we still keep doing, God doesn't see it. All he sees is you righteous through the blood of Christ. What a wonderful thing it is, and what a wonderful promise it is to know that our sins are forever pardoned, and God does not see them. We need to claim that promise. I think Joseph and his brothers, at the end of this story, have really experienced grace and mercy that only comes from God. And we can have that same kind of an experience as well. And it's the same mercy and grace that's being poured out on us every day, okay? We need to take it, we need to claim it as ours, and thank him for it, and make it our own. Thank you. We'll see you next week.